everybody. Welcome to Hot Topics today. My name is Sonyezo and I'm part of the Hot Topics team. Today we're looking into our new series called How Far is Too Far, and our topic is party culture. Should Christians party or not? We went out and we had a few interviews with some people and we wanted to find out what they had to say. So check out what they had to say.
Should party. I party. I think you celebrate. You celebrate with other people. You make friends. Certain parties that you should stay away from. And I know that in the Word, God says you must guard your heart and you must guard yourself, etc. So I've heard of parties that you just like, okay, can I be frank? Yeah, I've heard of sex parties. I've heard of cocaine parties. I've heard of what other type of parties? Yeah, so those type of parties that I just think that that create a multitude of complexity and ties and stuff. So yeah, those type of parties, you know.
I think what I dislike about the party space is sometimes how people can want to then come into your space uninvited. Advances that come from other people about wanting to be in your space without your consent, and sometimes it is forceful. So I think as a young woman in South Africa, it's become quite a very sketchy kind of a thing to party, because then you are placed in danger. So unless you're in a sort of like controlled area as much as possible.
So you just come in, just sitting together. Culturally, it has some merits. Also, when it comes to our Christian faith, it's also a hot topics of some sort, because of they will bring in now the sex before marriage thing, and there's so many ways to look at it. So I'm not saying it's good, it's not good.
I would not want to find my space in a party where there's consumption of drugs, there's consumption of excessive alcohol, there's maybe prostitution happening in that kind of party. No, so I think there should be a limit. And a limit in a sense that there are parties where it's my birthday party, and because it's my birthday party, I've invited friends, either maybe at a restaurant, at a nice restaurant, or in my backyard. So I think that would be a party where I could freely be at.
Yes, I do feel comfortable. Let's say I go there just to jive, just to dance, then come back home just to have a little bit of fun. Mara, not to go there, drink, have some drugs, and go with the ladies, do some things that are totally out of the way. I can go there just to see the artist that is performing.
Good evening and welcome to our Hot Topics conversation. Last week we introduced the new series, and you guys would have seen with some of the street interviews that we did that it's going to get wild. It's been a lot. It's been really fun recording this particular series, and we hope that you guys will enjoy it from home. It's an opportunity for us to just unpack some of the stuff that we're unsure about, and today we're going to be focusing on party culture. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it something we can do as Christians, or is it something we should completely avoid? Or even better, is it something that we can do with some wisdom going into it? And so to help us unpack this topic, myself and Ilse are joined today by Mitch, who's part of the Red Frog Party Safe movement. He'll explain that better. And then we're also joined by Sianda, who is part of a movement within the Methodist Church. IOTT, anyone would know that this means no alcohol. And so that's his interest also coming into this conversation. They will help us just unpack some of the stuff that we really need to consider as we engage and try and make sense of Christians and party culture. And so I'll just hand over to you guys to introduce yourself.
All right. Good evening, everyone at home. My name is Sianda Buhlebezo Makubo, and I am a young Christian, Methodist, devout Methodist. I'm also a true Templar, which means I believe in the consumption of the non-consumption of alcohol and drugs. And I am a rather young conservative Christian. So I'm really looking forward to this topic.
I'm so glad you mentioned that you're conservative because you, like, we're friends. I've wanted to be like, Sianda's so conservative.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. Thank you.
Cool, yeah, my name is Mitchell Thompson, and I work with Red Frogs, and as Hloni said, we are a party-safe network, and basically our mandate is to mobilize a generation of young people to care for and support another generation or the same generation of young people in party spaces. And so basically what our mission is to go into party culture and be a positive presence within that party culture to create a safe environment for people who exist within that culture as it's happening. And so we come alongside to support, and we would have very much the same, very similar view where we want to encourage young people to try and find alternative ways of celebrating, to try and find alternative ways of expressing their joy and expressing their identities in more, I suppose, adaptive and healthy ways. So, also excited about having this conversation and seeing where it goes.
Amazing. Both Ilse and I have been part of Red Frogs. So
it's an amazing experience. And I think coming to this conversation, it kind of offers us an opportunity to not just take the stance of our parents. Some of us might have had parents that are very conservative growing up, saying partying in any way, celebrating in any way with friends is a no-no. Some of us have a little bit more liberal parents. And it gives us an opportunity tonight to kind of unpack where we're at individually, but also for the young people at home to be able to formulate your own opinions about partying and why it might be good and why it might be bad and how we can do it or not do it.
absolutely. And so just to kick it off, I remember a couple of years back, there was a picture that came out of a young lady. She was, never mind how she was dressed, but she was in a party space and dressed in a way that is very common in party spaces. And then the following week, as controversial as this picture was, the following week, there was another picture of her in her church uniform. And people were like, oh my word, she actually goes to parties. But even to add on to that, I don't know about what your experience has been, but whenever I've been to parties, I do not avoid mentioning the fact that I work at a church and I'm a pastor because it's usually a conversation. Spoiler, suddenly people are like, what on earth are you doing here? I often say, people ask me, Hloni, what do you do for a living? And I say, I renegotiate ethics for a living, which is what I actually do. I don't know what your experience has been like, Ilse, but I think you can just share your experience and then we'll throw it out to you guys. Let's start on the principle. Is partying right or wrong? And what is your heart around it?
Yeah, I think I've definitely had a very similar experience. I've heard about a lot of pastors that will say they're life coaches. Instead of saying they're pastors, they work for non-profit organizations. I've heard a lot of euphemisms for the church. And I think in my experience, it's not necessarily something I'd readily advocate for, that I'm a youth pastor in that case. But I think what saves us there is also the fact that youth. But should it be something that we hide, or should it be something that we're proud of, and it actually becomes, a drawing point to Christians? And so, as you've asked, Hloni, we'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think?
Well, I'm a young conservative Christian, and there's no questions about where my values lie about how Christians ought to celebrate. And, the issues of values and morals are very personal, and I understand that when we gather in church, we are our own individual self, coming from different homes with different value systems. But something joins us together as Christians, and that is our values and ethics and morals, which is very important. And society ought to look at us at a very different light as Christians. We ought to be agents of social change. There must be a difference when you come to a room. There must, even in a party, when you go to a party, there must be a difference. So people must be able to draw inspiration from you. I find it very problematic when Christians are in a space and they're able to assimilate in the space. Their morals are left at home, and they are now becoming a part of society that they advocate against on a Sunday morning, right? So it's very hypocritical. So without bordering the spaces around whether we should be drinking alcohol or not, which I would obviously say we shouldn't, but that's not the topic of discussion today. But the party scene is a very important scene that I think we need to unpack. And where a Christian body finds themselves in, right? So it is a space as a Christian where I feel unsafe, number one. It is a space that I ought to be uncomfortable. It is a space that is very foreign to me. So it becomes very weird when a Christian body is in a party scene, and it is something that they don't advocate for, right? So there's drugs around, there's fornication around, there's touching, hopefully not during COVID. But these are things that exist. And so a party for a Christian ought to be something different that the world sees as a party scene. So if I'm in a party and there's Christians around, that should show. And so that's another conversation we need to have, where there's just Christians in the room, but you wouldn't think this is a party of Christians. And we've seen it over and over again. And so I have a problem with people volunteering their lives into a religion, into a church, so I'm Methodist, so into the Methodist church, and then at the same time wanting to continue with things that are outside of the church and outside of the religion. So it's a double standard, double sword thing. And so for me, Christianity, Methodism must be expressed. You must live it on a daily basis. People must see it on a daily basis at work. People must see it when you drive, your road rage, in shops, how you deal with issues of racism, sexism, xenophobia, and all of that. So parties are central to that because they're social circles, right? And this is where we interact. So it becomes very hypocritical when a Christian body is seen to perpetuate that which is against its Christian values, and specifically Methodism. And our church is very clear, you know, how we should live our lives, whether we should drink alcohol or not, whether we should do certain things at certain times. And so it becomes very hypocritical. Unless the dogma and the policy of the church changes, then the current status quo exists. You have volunteered to be a Methodist and live a life of Methodism. Otherwise, you're then putting the church to disrepute. And that's where I stand, and I'm very clear on that, right? So the issue then becomes, I am invited to a wedding, and the wedding turns rogue, right? That's nothing I can control. So, and I find myself in many instances, I've been invited and I've been asked to MC and preside over instances and events where it gets out of hand, right? But Sianda comes across. Sianda, the Christian young man, comes across. I mean, I'm one person in a wedding. When I a program director for a wedding, I'll excuse myself when the toast arrives because alcohol is involved and I don't understand the principle, so I excuse myself. So you see, I am in the space, I am socializing, I am one with the people, but my Christian values come through, and I think that's very important.
Thanks for that, Sianda.
Yeah, I love, I really love the ethic behind what you're saying. What I'm hearing from you is that Christians are given a glorious identity, and I believe that as Christians, it's not our doing that dictates our being, but it's our being that dictates our doing. Sure. It's who we are, which leads to what we do. And so we are redeemed people who are in this process of sanctification, this process of becoming who Jesus has made us into already. And so I think that obviously means the pursuit of holiness, which is a high calling. I think a lot of Christians really underestimate what it means to be called God's holy people. I think it's a privilege because right now we aren't, and I think we can all be aware of the fact that no matter how hard we try this side of eternity, holiness is something we'll always fall short of. Yet, we're still called holy, right? And so part of holiness is pursuing this Christian ethic, these Christian morals, which Jesus perfectly embodied. But the other part of being holiness is also imaging the side of Jesus who left his throne behind to enter into a broken space, to be an agent of transformation and change in that space. And so when Jesus was on earth, we find him in party spaces quite regularly. And that's one of the things I love about Jesus so much, is that Jesus didn't come to earth to point a finger from a distance, but Jesus came to earth to change from within. And one of my favorite stories in the Bible, well, it's actually a succession of stories, but it comes from Luke chapter 15, where we hear the three parables of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and then the prodigal son. But those three stories are precipitated by a question asked by the Pharisees, actually an accusation made by the Pharisees, that why do you spend all your time with sinners and tax collectors? And so then Jesus tells the story about when someone goes missing, when something precious goes missing, we seek after it with all of our zeal. We seek after it with everything we have. And when we have the privilege of discovering it and bringing it back, we celebrate, right? So the prodigal son ends with a party, right? And I truly believe that we are going to be entering into heaven one day, into our glorious future promised reality, with a party. And so what I believe is that our job as Christians is to bring that reality as much as we can into the present now. How can we party in a way here that communicates to a world what is awaiting them in heaven should they come to Jesus? And that involves everything that you're saying. We party, but we do it in a sanctified way. We celebrate because we have the most to celebrate in the world, but we do it in a way that is countercultural. So that as potential non-believers or not yet believers look in on the way that we party and think, yo, this is still fun. This is better, you know? And we do it without drinking. We do it without drugs. We do it without what you were saying, fornication and that stuff. And yet, I still think we should be more fun, if you know what I'm saying. Because of the truths that we're celebrating, they are more worth celebrating than, as awesome as finishing matric is, Jesus saving me from sin and death is cooler, you know? And I think that that's worth celebrating. And so I believe that we as Christians should be people who celebrate, but celebrate in a sanctified way that creates a wonderful witness for people to look into.
I love what both of you guys have mentioned. And the picture that comes to mind to me is from the Gospels, that illustration of the light on the hill. You know, that when you light a candle or you light a lamp, you don't put it under a basket, you don't hide its light, but that in fact you put it and display it. And I want to kind of just draw from that picture and to say that often we can encounter this idea of Christians that being a light in party spaces for some means going to party spaces and living out our faith in a different way. So for me personally, that's how I would be okay with the celebratory space, but what I do in that space must reflect the faith I hold. And you know, I love the way you started this conversation to say it's not necessarily, you necessarily say that you're a pastor, and I've got my reasons for that. It's because I want to allow people to experience me as a person that is relatable, and then to allow them to draw to Christ that is in me as a light, you know? Because often I think that's our unfortunate witness as a church is Christians are seen as hypocritical. And so you say you're a Christian up front, like a sticker on your forehead, people are like, and they start walking a different direction, you know? But I think we can also encounter a space where for some people meaning a light on the hill means completely abstaining from any celebratory space. And then we come to this idea that that's often associated with it as we are in the world but not of it. But yet, if we're drawn to the world to allow Christ to work through us, to save it, and we withdraw from the space where people are, how do we find ourselves really reaching out to people? And that's always been a question on my mind is, where's this perfect balance in between? I don't know if you guys would love to speak to that and your different perspectives on it.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned, and just to speak on what he also mentioned, that so this holiness, this idea of holiness is a process, and that's what most Christians don't understand, right? So in a process to perfection, to holiness, and it's certainly one of the questions I always get as a true Templar, so an abstainer of alcohol and drugs, that, well, but these Templars who still drink and who still take drugs. And my question is that it is a process towards that, you know. I think we can all agree that there is nothing in the world, there's no product in the world that does not have alcohol today. So if I'm going to sit here and say I don't take alcohol, then I'll be hypocritical, right? So it is a process towards that, and that's very important. But also, what you also mentioned is the question of this light, or rather the salt. Are we becoming the salt into a tasteless world, right? So just 2 years ago, interesting enough, just 24 months ago, I would have never been in a party scene. You would have never seen me in a club. You would have never seen me sitting in a table with other people drinking alcohol in my presence. Literally, a TV ad of alcohol would come up and I'll switch off the television. Just 2 years ago. But I've taken that stance, right, of being the light and of being the salt to a tasteless world. So I go to parties when I'm invited. I'm not going there to preach to people. No. But a simple behavior that is seen from me, that I express. So if I'm offered a drink and I say I don't drink, a conversation starts, right? So people see the behaviors, people see how you treat other people with respect, and that inspires them. I don't know how many people I've recruited for the church, but just being myself in spaces that I would have otherwise not been. So that's why I always say that we need to be the salt to the world. People need to see it in you. People need to see Christianity living in you. Because otherwise, what's the difference between us and them? Really, that is the question. So if we're the same people and we have not changed, and we party and we drink and we do all these things with the same people, then what's the point?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the salt and the light. My wife and I we moved recently, and we were cleaning out our kitchen, which is always fun because you find things that you'd forgotten.
Well done for the kitchen being fun.
So we found an old salt shaker that we hadn't used. Well, actually it was from before we got married that I hadn't used in years. And we tried to pour the salt out of the salt shaker, but we couldn't because all the salt had kind of formed together and fused together to form this really useless chunk of nothingness that now we had to throw away the whole salt shaker because there was no way of getting the salt out. And I worry that we as the church have the potential to be that way.
Sure.
I worry that we as the church gather on Sundays, every Sunday, we worship, we hear the word of God, we celebrate together, and then we never go out into the world to take the message that we celebrate in here on Sundays. And what ends up happening is we fuse together, we mold together to become this rock salt that is not useful for preservation, that's not useful for flavoring, and is actually entirely useless to the world around us. And I think that a lot of the messages that we'll hear in the church today is we should invite people to come and see. Mm-hmm. But Jesus told us to go and tell.
That's true.
He didn't say come and see. Jesus came and he told, and then he said to his disciples, go and tell. Yeah. And so if we want to be flavor to the world, salt is also used for preserving. If we want to preserve the ethics of the world, we have to be in the world. We have to be there. You can't preserve meat with salt if you're not pouring salt on the meat. And so we need to be out there. We need to be in those spaces, but as a preservative flavoring agent, not as, it would be weird for salt to start turning into meat, if that makes sense.
I love what you guys are now speaking about here, and the liberal in me is actually sitting here, and I'm wondering, and this is where I sometimes tread very carefully as a youth pastor, particularly to young people. I'm a pastor to young people. There is a sense in which when young people go into party spaces with the notion that they are the light, the other assumption that has been made is that everyone else is in the dark. And they're going in as a light. And it creates a very judgmental young person. There are examples. You came through with the Bible, Mish. The examples in the Bible, the prodigal son, the story of the prodigal son ends with a party. But the one person who saw himself as a light over everyone else does not join in the party. And there's a sense in which we as Christians can be in a party but not be at a party. Mm-hmm. Because everyone else needs to be saved and we are safe. Mm-hmm. But there's a prodigal son. There's a story of Herod's party. When Herod throws a party and at the end, John the Baptist is beheaded. Then there's the story of, we all know this, Jesus performs his first miracle at a party. Yeah. And you find that some of the things that we tend to condemn as Christians is not the variable that makes these parties different. Because you look at the story of the prodigal son, it's a great story. The story of John the Baptist being beheaded at Herod's party is a horrific story. The story of Jesus at performing the first miracle is a great story. And yet the variable between this horrific story and this great story is not necessarily alcohol, as some people might be sitting at home thinking, it's something different.
Sure, that was quite thought-provoking. So let's go out again and check out what people had to say about their worst party experiences or the experiences that they've heard about that were quite, out there.
I haven't had one so far, but I feel like the worst one is like being at a party and like people are peer pressuring you to do things that you don't want to.
I've never really heard of bad stories or had a bad experience.
And like just being around drunk people is just not nice, eh?
So a friend of mine was raped at a party. She had a date rape drug poured into her drink. By the way, it was just one drink that she had, and that was all it took for her to be taken down. And it was very sad because we all had to watch, and we couldn't do anything about it because we couldn't get access into that space.
I've had a lot where people got spiked at parties, whereby some of them ended up being date raped. So yeah, that's for me the worst, to get spiked on your drink.
I heard about a party where there was even police involved because the children were being very irresponsible, and a disruption to the neighbors even.
Waking up next to strangers because of what they had consumed last night at a party.
Experience. Yeah. Well, I haven't had one so far, but I feel like the worst one is like being at a party and like people are peer pressuring you to do things that you don't want to.
What happened was there was this get together, a chill spot at the park one day, and later that night, it was a guy's 21st also. Later that night, the guy there was a fight that broke out, and out of self-defense, one killed the other. And but I wasn't at the event. I was at home.
And so, just to kind of draw this further as we draw towards a close, there's a beautiful illustration that is drawn about C.S. Lewis. It's and him being in a pub. It says, C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, and the Inkling gathered at the local pub with a beer, laughing while they shared the ideas that they are thinking, the stories they are writing, and generally enjoying their Christian friendship. But that is, however, a very different picture to students binge drinking until they are passed out on a bathroom floor. So what this tries to bring in is that people can be at a party space engaging in alcohol, but with different motives. Sure. Yeah. It can be completely different for different people. So how do we hold that reality? However, at the very same time, encourage young people to go into party spaces and be themselves in a way that is encouraging, motivating, inspiring towards others. However, at the same time, without developing this judgmental attitude towards people at a party and life in general.
I think that's so good, and I really appreciate you drawing that comparison, that just because we're going into spaces to be the light doesn't mean that everyone in that space is in darkness. In fact, there are parts of us that are dark that we still need to be illuminated by the light, And so one of the ways that, when we're training to go into Red Frogs, obviously this is one of the things that we really want to encourage people in, is you're not going into this dark space to be a savior to the dark space, because we were once a very dark space, and the light came to us where we were, and the light continues to come to us where we are. And so I often encourage people to reflect on their own stories before going into any mission, whatever the mission is, but specifically Red Frogs. All of us were involved in things that were dark, that may just not have happened in a party space, but Jesus still came to us in that space anyway. And so separating ourselves on the basis that I didn't used to party is an arbitrary separation to make, And I think the best, and I'll try and keep this very brief, but the best illustration of this is when Jesus comes in John 5 to the pool of Bethsaida. And what many people don't know about that is that there was a belief amongst people that once a year, an angel would come down and trouble the waters at the pool of Bethsaida. And then all of the people would rush to be the first one into the pool, because the first one into the pool would be healed. And so what ends up happening is now you've got hundreds of paralyzed people living around this pool, just waiting for the moment that this angel comes down and troubles the water. Jesus comes and says to one of these guys, "Do you want to be healed?" And the dude says, "Yes, I just can't get to the pool." Like Jesus is standing right there, the one who can bring healing. And he's saying, "Do you want to be healed?" And yet this guy is still looking at the false promise of healing and choosing that over the real promise of healing that is being offered here by Jesus. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that we all have our pool. Every single one of us has a pool that we run to offer us the healing that we know we need, but we don't know that pool can't offer us what we're looking for. So that pool could even be things like success. Maybe we work really hard to be really successful, because if I just earn enough money, then I'll be fine. But what we don't know is we have to sacrifice our families and friends on the altar to the God of success, Maybe it's acceptance, and that can play into party culture. Maybe if I can just be accepted and be loved, then I'll be okay. And some people then see that pool. If I can just have much fun as I possibly can with my life, then I'll have meaning. I will have lived a good life. And so what I encourage everyone to do, before thinking that we are the light in a particular situation and looking down on others, is realizing that we all have a pool. And Jesus has saved us as Christians from that pool. And so we go in not as people who have never had pools, but people who have been saved from our one. And we're just going in and offering the true healing of the living water, who didn't call us to himself, but came to us. And I think that protects us from being judgmental and from looking down on others, by seeing that we're the same, just in a different manifestation of sameness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, really. I think that's very important, that people understand that we are imperfect beings, and that we're in the process to being perfect beings, and so that makes you relatable, that makes you human. Sometimes some of us are being seen as superhuman, and we have stories, right? So one of the reasons why I don't take alcohol, for instance, is because I grew up with an alcoholic father, right? So you see where that comes from. So there's a story behind it. So I wasn't born and I started hating alcohol. There's a story behind that. There's context. And I think it's very important that people understand what that context is. The story behind the journey. And it is a journey. So when I drove here, I went on the N1, I off-ramped on the Ellendale, and there was Waterfall Estates, and suddenly I was on a gravel road, and suddenly I'm in a beautiful church building, right? And that's exactly what it is. It's a journey. We will break, we will fall, but I think what's very important is that ourselves as individuals, the substance of who we are, must not ever evaporate. And I think that's the groundwork. So even if you're seen in a party, your individualness, your Christianness must come through. If you're seen in a place you're not supposed to be seen, people must say, "But I saw the same Sianda I saw on Sunday," right? So I think that's very important. We are hypocrites, we are judgmental, and this only points to one thing, that we're people, we're human. And that's the journey, and that's the teaching that Jesus Christ was trying to teach. When he walked into the temple, instructing them that this is my father's house, keep it holy. That's exactly what he was trying to do, teach, and that's the journey of being Christian.
Sianda and Mitch, you guys have just mentioned brilliant points, and I just want to throw it to you, Ilse, as we're about to end. And I'm wondering if there's room for us to then say, perhaps the party space, as we all go in as a light, everyone has an inherent light. We all created in the likeness of Jesus. And perhaps if, like for instance, Sianda's one of those friends that comes in with a moral code and we're like, oh gosh, here's Sianda again, literally. But the beauty of it is that when you come into our space, you ignite everyone else's light. You remind us that we carry something special. Sure. And perhaps our presence in a party is not to be a light for a whole lot of dark beings, but rather to be a light that ignites. It's almost like we're matchsticks walking into a matchbox. And ours is not to just be the single matchstick that's going to give everyone else light, but rather to light up everyone else and remind them that, hey, remember, you're a CEO. You can also teach us how to spend wisely as we all gather here together. You know, oh, no, remember, Ilse, you care about family. You can just remind us. You can remind Mitch that, hey, Mitch, you need to call your wife and make sure that it's still okay for you to be out at this time. You know, and then is there room for that?
I think definitely. I think as Christians, we not only represent light, but we represent hope. And so with that, what you read is there's a sense of hope. How they gathered together, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, they all gathered together to celebrate something. They had their reasons for celebrating. We're not condemning celebration, I think, any of them. That's what I'm picking up, is nobody is condemning celebration. It's just how we celebrate, why we celebrate, and what we celebrate. And I think it's exactly that. It's as we walk into a space, we remind people that there is hope. That even in a space that they might be at, standing at that pool, like you highlighted, you look into that pool and you see the reflection of Jesus behind you rather than looking into that pool for your hope. And so I think there's a lot for us. It's an extremely nuanced topic, and I think we have not managed to exhaust the entire topic. And I just want to encourage everyone at home to have a conversation like this with your friends, your family, with your adolescents at home, and really just find out one another's views about this and listen to people's stories. I think there's so much value in stories. Each of us has our reasons for it, and so to really hear one another's stories around this. And so we hope that you will join us for our next Hot Topics. We will also be having some street interviews and some exciting things in our next episode, and so we hope to see you soon.
And just in saying thank you to Mitch and Sianda, just before I say thank you guys, I just want to say to everyone at home, remember, there's a beautiful quote I read this week, and it says, when you go into a space, it's actually something I was listening to, but when you go into a space, you must remember to show up. Do not fit in, because that means putting behind who you truly are. But show up, say, I refuse to shrink myself. I refuse to be anything less than who I truly am. And that was Brené Brown and speaking about vulnerability. And so thank you so much, Mitch and Sianda. You guys have been amazing. And we really hope that we'll have you back sometime, because I get the sense that you are the voices that, you're part of the voices that we all need to hear. Thank you so much. See you on Tuesday at 7 o'clock as we further unpack our topic at our Tuesday night chat conversations. Thank you.